Welcome to the Probate Nation. My name is Richard Ruddy and I'm the host of our show tonight. Our show today addresses what is the Federal Employer Identification Number, who needs it and why, and how to obtain one from the IRS. There are three common situations where an FEIN is needed when someone becomes incapacitated or dies. Let's discuss each of those situations. First, if you have created a revocable trust and are the sole trustee or a co-trustee of that trust, then no FEIN is needed for this trust. You would use your Social Security number and that trust would remain invisible to the IRS for reporting purposes. However, if you have not died but have ceased to be a trustee of the revocable trust for whatever the reason may be, including your incapacity, then that trust will need to get an FEIN number. This often arises as a result of litigation in which a conservator is appointed by the court to manage your assets that are not in that revocable trust. The second situation arises when you pass away and someone qualifies from a local probate office to probate your estate. The estate has its own tax identity and tax reporting obligations, so the estate needs an FEIN. And the final situation, which also arises when you pass away, involves your revocable trust. On your death, your revocable trust typically becomes irrevocable, and at that point it also has its own tax identity and tax reporting obligation. So this irrevocable trust needs an FEIN as well. Today we will learn from an expert the nuts and bolts on how to obtain the Federal Employer Identification Number in each of the above situations. Joining us is a partner from the McLean Certified Public Accounting Firm of Renner, Williams, and Mooney. He graduated from George Mason University and has a master's degree from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. He has been in public accounting as a CPA for 37 years and focuses his practice on taxation. Please welcome CPA Dave Williams. Hi, Dave.
Thank you, Richard.
It's a pleasure to have you join us today. Thanks for stopping by and sharing your thoughts. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about here.
Yes.
You know, it seems like it's pretty straightforward, but actually there are little tricks that we need to be concerned about. So first off, let's just talk about what is this thing we call a Federal Employer Identification Number, or the acronym is FEIN, FIN.
Well, a identification number is needed for filing all tax returns. Individuals have their Social Security numbers. All other entities have to get a employer identification number.
Okay.
Whether they're trusts, corporations, partnerships, or estates. This is needed so that IRS can match up information it receives in tax payments that are remitted to it to the appropriate entity. They do this by using the employer identification number.
Okay. So let's get into it. We kind of give a big picture about what it is. So let's just talk again, you know, when is it needed and why? So let's talk about an estate. Do we need a tax ID number for an estate?
Yes, you do, because the individual's Social Security number stops on the date of his death. All his assets, which are still earning money, etc., are going to go on a tax return, and so it has to have its own identification number.
Okay, so date of death stops his personal 1040 tax return filing, and now we pick up a fiduciary tax reporting obligation for the estate.
That is correct.
Okay, let's talk about, is it needed? Many people have revocable trust, okay, while they're living. So is a tax ID number needed for revocable trust when someone's living?
Generally, the answer is no. The revocable trust means they can put assets in, take assets out. It's treated as, for tax purposes, it's treated as their asset, and the income on it is their income. So there's no identification number needed.
Now there is kind of a switch over. Of course, now when they die, okay,
yes,
that's something different. But before we get to that, let's say they become incapacitated and they no longer can serve as trustee or co-trustee of their trust. What happens then?
And they do need to get an identification number because somebody else is taking over their trust.
Okay.
So it is no longer their asset. So a trust return has to be filed. A K-1 is issued showing the various amounts and sources of income. And when a K-1 is issued for IRS to match it up, they need an identification number.
Okay. And that return that gets filed is really an information return.
That is
Because
correct.
we're still filing all that information at the end of the day on the incapacitated person's 1040 tax
Correct.
return. So then the last thing is we talk about a revocable trust where the person has passed away and that trust was revocable, was invisible, they were using their Social Security number, but they died. At that point, what happens to that revocable trust typically?
Well, generally it becomes an irrevocable trust. And since an irrevocable trust is its own taxable entity, it needs an identification number so IRS can keep track of the income, and if it has to make tax payments because it owes income tax, they can match up the tax payments to the correct entity.
Okay. Okay, so good. So now we understand when it's needed and why. So let's talk about who issues this magical number.
Well, it's issued by IRS.
Oh, our friends.
That's right.
They're here to help us.
And there's no separate one for any state. It's always just the IRS.
So the states sort of piggyback off that.
That's right.
With through information exchange. So how does one typically, what are the choices as far as how to apply for a FEIN?
Well, you have to fill out a form SS4,
Okay.
which is a one-page form. It covers everybody, including corporations and partnerships. And if you file it by paper, you can do that, mail it in, you get your number 6 to 8 weeks from now. You can do it online, and at the end of the process, you get the number instantaneously.
Okay.
That is the preferred way to do it.
Very much so. And I know many folks do it that way.
Yes.
Well, let's go ahead and break down and go through the application process using the tax form SS-4. And for our viewers, I'll let you know that the SS-4 is, one of those magical IRS forms that they'll tell you it takes you about 20 minutes to prepare. Yet you'll find yourself scratching your head and reading the explanations, and it'll take you longer than that. So what we're going to try to do is walk through first getting a tax ID number for the revocable trust of an incapacitated person. Okay, so you have a revocable trust, person has been determined incapacitated, they can no longer serve as the trustee, and we're going to walk through this paper application, Form SS-4, and kind of talk about what you have to do. And this form will post this with some explanations online at the website for the Probate Nation. So David, let's take a look at this form. Someone is incapacitated, they have a revocable trust. We now know we need to get a tax ID number for that trust. Right. So we have this form. So the first line, these are numbered. So number 1, what do we fill in there?
Well, you'd actually just put in the actual legal name of the trust.
Okay.
Whether it's John Doe Trust, Trust of John Doe, whatever you want to call it, that's going to be the legal name, and that's going to be the name that's going to be with IRS.
Okay. So then line number 3 is a box that asks for information about the executors and trustees. So
correct. So whoever's the new trustee of the trust, they fill in their name in box 3.
Okay. And then box 4A and 4B looks like they're asking for a mailing address where that person wants to receive correspondence from the IRS.
Correct.
And then box 6, what's that about? It says county and state.
That's just mainly so IRS knows exactly where it is. So if you live in Fairfax County, you put Fairfax County, Virginia.
Okay. Box 7A and 7B. So 7A asks for the name of the responsible party. So who would that be?
Generally, that would be the new trustee.
The new trustee.
And then over in box 7B, they'd have to put in their Social Security number.
Okay. Then we go down to box 9A. So again, we have a revocable trust, so there's a number of little boxes inside of 9A to check. So the one for a revocable trust would be the one that says trust, TIN of grantor.
Correct.
So what would you put on that line next to that?
That would be the person who is incapacitated.
Okay.
Because they're the ones that originally created the trust.
And do we put a tax ID number in there for them as well?
No, because you will get that.
Would you put a Social Security number in there?
Yes, yes. Oh, yes.
So in that little
Social
box
Security.
so they can connect
Yes.
that together. Okay. So the next box we want to take a look at is box number 10. and we're trying to ask you why we're applying. Which one do we check in that box when we're doing this revocable
Well, you
trust?
check the box that says created a trust,
Okay.
and then you specify what it is. And in this case, you would put in a grantor trust incapacity
Or something to that,
or
to that
something
effect.
to that effect.
Okay. The next box is number 11 that we want to look at. Now, what do we put in there? It says,
Well, that would be the date that the person was judged to be incapacitated.
okay.
So
Okay.
that's the starting date of this new trust.
So that typically would be the date the court order was entered, if there
Correct.
was actually a proceeding. The rest of the boxes we don't really have to worry about, I don't think, do we? 14, 15?
No, the only one would be maybe be 12, which would be the closing month of the accounting year, which is,
Right.
since it's a trust is always going to be December.
Sure. Then down in 18, do we answer that? Do we answer that question?
You would answer that no, because this particular trust has never applied for a ID number before.
Okay. So at that point, we have enough information that we can go ahead and sign this down in the bottom of the form
Correct?
and put your phone number in there if you want to do so. Probably be helpful if you did.
Right.
And you can either fax it in. There is a fax number that you can fax it in, or you can put it in the mail. Fax is probably a little bit faster. Mail is much slower. Okay. So that gets us to the first one. Let's take a look at an estate, though. If someone has died, we have this estate that needs their own tax ID number, and again, we're going to have a paper application that's going to be identified as estate, and we're going to walk through the appropriate boxes you need to fill out. So again, number 1,
Number 1 would just be the name of the estate, whether it's John Doe Estate,
or estate of John Doe, whatever that
Estate of
might
Mary
be.
Smith, whatever you want to call it, and that's going to be the name that's going to be stuck with it for eternity.
Okay. And then number 3, box number 3, we'll put the name of the executor that was appointed.
Correct.
And then box 4A and 4B, we put their addresses in there. And
Right.
again, in box 6, we'll put in the county or state where they were qualifying.
Correct.
So if they qualified in Fairfax, we'll put Fairfax, Virginia. If it's Alexandria, put Alexandria, Virginia. And then name of responsible party. And in 7A and 7B, would that be the executor?
That would be the executor again. And then, of course, in 7B, they have to put in their social security number.
And it's important people understand that they're trying to connect all the activity of this estate. So if the fiduciary was to claim deductions and so on, they're connecting that social security number with expenses that maybe should be shown up as income in the estate of the fiduciary.
Correct. That's correct.
Part of that. So the next box, we're going to look down in box 9. They asked the type of entity. Which box do we now check here?
Well, they made it easy for us because they made a little checkbox for an estate.
Okay.
And then next to it, you put in the social security number of the decedent.
Okay. So they can connect these things together.
Right.
So the next box we go to is box 10, reason for applying, and what do we do there?
What I've always done, I've checked other and then just said specify and say estate created.
Okay, very good. Closing tax year, number 12. This one is kind of interesting for an estate.
Yes.
Explain why.
For an estate, it can have a year end that ends on any month that the estate chooses, so long as the first year does not exceed 12 months in length.
So if someone died June 19th
June 19th, they can go all the way up to May 31st.
of the next year, and then
Of the
after that their tax period would be June 1st to May 31st.
Correct.
So we have, and there's some interesting options and tax plan that can take place there. But let's say we put down a particular month. Are we bound by that here?
No, you're not.
Okay.
You're not bound by it until you file your first tax return.
Okay. Okay, so that's good to know. Number 18 is the next box we would go to for the estate. So again, they're looking to see if someone has previously applied, and typically you'd answer no.
Answer no, because the person hasn't died before, so
That's what we would certainly hope not.
you just create one estate.
Okay. And then after that, we sign the form and we go through the same process of either
Correct.
faxing it in or sending it by paper, by mail, snail mail. Okay. So that gets us through the conservatorship-related trust, and now we've come back to the next thing in connection with an estate. So in this situation, someone has died with some assets, maybe in his own name, so he has an estate with its own tax ID number, its
Correct.
own FEIN. But he also has a revocable trust, which he has assets in that, and so that trust now typically was revocable, has now become irrevocable.
Correct.
So we need to get a tax ID number for that trust, which is going to be different than the ID number for the estate.
Correct.
Okay.
So you could end up with two ID numbers.
Okay, and potentially two tax returns, and we're going to talk about
Correct.
ways to deal with that. So the next thing we're going to do is, again, we're going to take a look at the SS-4 and walk through how we apply for the FEIN for this trust that was revocable and invisible to the IRS and now has become visible. So we go take a look at line 1, and what do we put in there?
Line 1, you'd put in John Doe Irrevocable Trust.
Irrevocable trust. So a lot of times people have trusts that are named John Doe Revocable Trust, dated whatever.
Right.
But at this point, since it's now become irrevocable, we really should go ahead and not confuse people by
Right.
having it named Revocable Trust when it's now irrevocable.
Correct.
So we'll go ahead and name it John Doe Irrevocable Trust. So we need to know who's in charge. We do that in box 3.
Box 3, it would be whoever the new trustee is.
Okay.
That's what goes in box 3. And then box 4, again, is just the mailing address where correspondence is to be sent.
Okay.
In box 6, we've got the county and state where the trust is located. Then number 7 would be the name of the responsible party, which is the new trustee.
Okay.
And of course, then 7B, they have to put in their social security number.
Okay, so it's important people to know you're going to need to have not only your social security number, but often you're going to need to have the social security number of the decedent at some point. So then box 9A, what kind of entity we have here?
Well, I've always checked other and then specified it and just say created irrevocable trust,
Okay,
so that IRS knows it's now an irrevocable trust.
and so then in number 10, reason for applying, we have this box called created a trust, and that we would then say in that little line there that it's an irrevocable trust.
That is correct.
Okay, so that explains that. When does this trust start? Box 11 asks that question. When did this begin?
The trust becomes irrevocable on the date of the person's death.
Okay,
So they
that's
put
what
in their date of death on line 11.
Okay,
And then for 12, since it's a trust, it has to have a December year end.
so that question there asks for the closing month of the accounting year, and it doesn't matter when you die. For a trust, it has to have a December 31st end date.
And that is correct.
Okay. We move down through the rest of those boxes typically, and then we get to number 18, and again we ask that same question: Has the trust anyone ever applied to be the?
And the answer again is no,
Okay,
because
good.
it was irrevocable. What didn't exist before the person died.
Okay, good. So I think that takes us through the paper applications. But a lot of people, nowadays, as we mentioned, will go online. Okay, so there is an IRS website, www.irs.gov, and there is a spot on there where you can click the button to take you to the application online, and you can apply. So, but we would suggest to our viewers, I think it's a very good idea, that they complete the paper application first, get all that information collected.
That's right.
So that they then are able to go ahead and complete the application online, which generally can go relatively smoothly. There is, some questions at the very beginning, and we will have these posted to the Probate Nation website, which begins to ask you what type of legal structure you have. So at the very outset, if you're in a estate or a trust, you'll press the appropriate box for how you're applying. And then from there, you work yourself through their questions. There is, it's pretty straightforward. The most important thing I think at the very end is you have an opportunity to decide how you'd like to receive your EIN confirmation letter. And so one way is to get it by letter, is to get a letter by mail, which we would advise against. The other option is to receive it online. So when you check that box and it comes online, you can see it. please make sure that you save it right away.
And print it out.
And print it out, because once it disappears, it's gone.
That's right.
And you'll have to communicate with the IRS. But that's a very, very helpful process, and it goes relatively smoothly. We're running out of time here. I wanted to talk about, though, we talked about an estate and a trust of a decedent, where we have two different tax ID numbers, two different tax years, and that can be sometimes can pose some tax consequences that are not helpful.
That's correct.
So, is there any way to deal with that?
Yes, there is. The Internal Revenue Code allows an election to be made so that the estate and the trust can be combined on one tax return. And you use that, you elect that by using Form 8855.
This is the form, and we'll certainly post this, but this is a Form 8855 that allows you to start that, to let the IRS know that we're going to go ahead and combine the estate and the trust. So what tax year do we take then if we do that?
Then you take the tax year of the estate.
So that's important. So we may have a very nice fiscal year where we can get all of our income and expenses on one return.
Correct.
Is that the advantage of doing this?
Yes, and sometimes it allows the estate to be completely closed out within that fiscal year of the estate.
Sure.
So you'll have to file one tax return. This election is only good for the first 2 years of the estate. So if the trust is still going on after the second year of the estate, then the trust starts filing its own return, and it has to do it on a calendar year basis.
Okay, we would definitely want to get it done in 2 years if we
Correct.
could. But that's a very helpful tool for our viewers to keep in mind, and again, something that allows you to obtain some nice tax advantages as you sort of combine all those income and expenses together.
Correct.
There's a lot here, David, and would like to hear some of your closing suggestions and comments, about getting the tax ID number, some of the things that you've run into, any suggestions you might have to our viewers. I would certainly like you to share that if you could.
Sure. We've gone over why the identification number is important, because individuals have their Social Security numbers, all other entities have to have an EIN number, and it's important so that IRS can match up tax payments made by the trust or the estate to the correct return. They can also match up income from one return to the next. And that's the reason you want to get your EIN as early as possible, so that you can get your bank account set up early. You can get the brokerage accounts set up so that they issue the 1099s under the correct identification number. Mm-hmm. One of the big problems I've seen is that nobody tells the brokerage house, and somebody dies in May, and lo and behold, they get a 1099. The individual gets a 1099 that covers the entire year.
Oh, goodness.
Which, then you got to sort it out on the return, which you're going to get questions from IRS about it. And it's fairly simple to get an identification number. You just file the Form SS4 online. Is much better than doing it by paper in mail. So that's the reason you want to get it done early, is so you have all your ducks in a row. It makes the process much easier.
Excellent. Dave, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come and visit with us today. This is, it seems like it's relatively straightforward, but boy, oh boy, this can, you can get yourself into so many headaches if you don't get this done early and do it right. And again, thank you for this great public service that you've done for the probate nation.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks for coming by.
Okay.
This brings us to the conclusion of our show today. There are many tasks to be done in handling the assets of a loved one who becomes incapacitated, or in the course of probating an estate of a loved one who has passed away. High on the list to be done early is often the need to apply for a federal employer identification number, referred to as the FEIN, and this show will serve as an externally helpful tool to those who need an FEIN. But remember the importance of meeting with professionals like CPAs and attorneys early in the course of any decedent or living probate, and allow them to be your guide as to what needs to be done, when, and by who, so that your journey, no matter where it takes you, goes as smoothly as possible. This brings us to the conclusion of our show today. We hope you found it informative. Replays of this show and all shows to date, along with other helpful information, are available on the Probate Nation website, including annotated FEIN applications and comments that you can use to follow along when you view this show. We encourage you to take advantage of this public service resource. On behalf of the Probate Nation, thank you for visiting with us.